Sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest messages. In a world where adults march in formation and follow protocols, it takes the innocent wisdom of a child to remind everyone what truly matters. When thousands of people line the streets expecting a perfect parade, they never imagined that a single moment of pure compassion from a 7-year-old girl would bring everything to a complete standstill. This is not just a story about a parade that stopped. This is about the day humanity paused to witness something so beautiful that grown men cried, photographers forgot to take pictures, and an entire city learned what real courage looks like when it comes from the heart of a child. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Main Street as Sarah Martinez adjusted her daughter Emma's red hair ribbon for the third time. The 7-year-old stood patiently while her mother fussed over her appearance, but Emma's bright green eyes were focused on something else entirely. Down the street, she could see them gathering. The homeless people who usually stayed hidden in doorways and alleys were slowly emerging, drawn by the promise of a rare public celebration. Today was Memorial Day, and the annual parade was about to begin. For most families in the small town of Millfield, this was a cherished tradition. Children would wave flags, veterans would march in formation, and the community would come together to honor those who had served their country. But Emma had been watching the streets differently lately, ever since her grandmother had taught her something important about seeing people that others often overlooked. 3 weeks earlier, Emma's grandmother, Rosa, had taken her on a walk through downtown. As they passed a man sitting quietly near the library steps, Rosa had stopped and handed him a sandwich she had brought from home. Emma watched as the man's eyes filled with tears of gratitude, and she asked her grandmother why he seemed so sad and alone. Rosa had explained that sometimes people found themselves without homes, without families nearby, and that they were still human beings who deserved kindness and respect. Since that day, Emma had begun to notice them everywhere. The woman with the shopping cart who collected bottles near the park. The elderly man who sat on the bench outside the grocery store, always wearing the same faded jacket. The younger woman who sometimes slept in the doorway of the old bookstore. Emma had started asking her mother questions about these people, questions that Sarah found difficult to answer. Now, as the parade preparations continued around them, Emma watched as more homeless individuals appeared along the parade route. Some carried small American flags they had found or been given. Others simply stood quietly, hoping to be part of something bigger than their daily struggle for survival. But Emma noticed something that made her heart ache, the way other people looked at them, or more accurately, the way they tried not to look at them at all. The parade organizers, dressed in crisp uniforms and carrying clipboards, were directing the crowd to designated viewing areas. Emma saw one organizer approach a group of homeless individuals who had positioned themselves near a prime viewing spot. The conversation was brief, but clear in its intent. They were being asked to move along to find somewhere less visible to watch from. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, why can't they watch the parade too?" Sarah followed her daughter's gaze and saw the scene unfolding. Her first instinct was to explain that this was just how things worked, that there were designated areas for families and that the organizers were just trying to keep things orderly. But looking into Emma's innocent eyes, she found herself questioning whether how things work was always the same as how things should work. The Martinez family had lived in Millfield for generations. Sarah's father had been a veteran himself, and this parade held deep meaning for their family. But Emma's simple question was forcing Sarah to see the event through different eyes. These weren't troublemakers or people looking to cause problems. They were individuals who also wanted to honor the memory of those who had served, who perhaps had served themselves, who deserved to be part of this community moment. As the minutes ticked by, Emma continued to observe. She watched as the homeless individuals complied with the request to move, walking slowly toward the back of the crowd or to side streets where their view would be partially blocked by buildings and trees. She saw the way they held themselves, not with anger or defiance, but with a quiet resignation that suggested this was nothing new for them. The first marching band could be heard in the distance, their drums creating a rhythm that made Emma's heart beat faster with excitement. Under normal circumstances, she would have been completely focused on the approaching parade, eager to see the colorful uniforms and hear the patriotic music. But today, something else was occupying her thoughts. Emma had been carrying something special in her small backpack, a flag her grandfather had given her before he passed away. It was a full-sized American flag, carefully folded, that had been presented to her grandmother when her grandfather was laid to rest. Rosa had recently passed it down to Emma, telling her that it represented not just her grandfather's service, but the values he had believed in: equality, compassion, and the idea that in America, everyone deserved dignity and respect. As Emma felt the weight of that flag in her backpack, she began to form an idea. It was simple, really the kind of idea that only comes from a child's uncompromised sense of right and wrong. She didn't think about consequences or what other people might say. She only thought about what her grandfather would have wanted, what her grandmother had taught her, and what her own heart was telling her to do. The parade was now clearly visible in the distance. The color guard was leading the way, followed by veterans from different wars, each group carrying the memories and sacrifices of their generation. The crowd began to cheer and wave their smaller flags, creating a sea of red, white, and blue that stretched for blocks. But Emma's attention was still divided. Even as the excitement built around her, she kept glancing toward the areas where the homeless individuals had relocated. Some were standing behind trees, craning their necks to see between the branches. Others had found spots along the side streets, where they could catch glimpses of the parade as it passed by the intersections. Sarah noticed her daughter's distraction and assumed it was just excitement mixed with the overwhelm of such a large crowd. She placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder and pointed toward the approaching parade. "Look, honey, here they come." Emma looked, and she saw the beauty of the moment, the proud veterans, the emotional families, the community coming together to honor sacrifice and service. But she also saw the incompleteness of it, the way it could be more beautiful, more inclusive, more true to the values it was supposed to represent. As the first groups of marchers drew closer, Emma made her decision. She quietly slipped her backpack off her shoulders and unzipped it, feeling for the carefully folded flag inside. Her heart was beating fast now, not just from excitement about the parade, but from a nervous energy that comes with knowing you're about to do something that matters, something that might change everything. The crowd pressed forward as the parade approached their section of Main Street. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders for better views. Cameras appeared, ready to capture the perfect patriotic moment. Veterans in the crowd straightened their shoulders and placed their hands over their hearts as the color guard came into view. Emma took a deep breath and stepped forward, moving toward the street, just as the leading edge of the parade reached their position. Sarah, caught up in the excitement of the moment and trying to get her own phone ready to record, didn't immediately notice her daughter's movement. But Emma was no longer thinking about her mother or the crowd or what anyone might think of what she was about to do. She was thinking about her grandfather, who had believed that service meant protecting everyone's right to dignity. She was thinking about her grandmother, who had taught her that true patriotism meant making sure everyone felt included in America's promise. And she was thinking about the people standing in the shadows who deserve to be seen and honored as part of this community. As Emma reached the edge of the street, the flag clutched tightly in her small hands. The first drums of the marching band grew louder. The moment that would change everything was just seconds away, and a 7-year-old girl was about to teach an entire town about the true meaning of honor, inclusion, and the courage that comes from a pure heart. Emma stepped into the street just as the color guard passed by, their polished boots moving in perfect synchronization with the drumbeat. The lead veteran, Sergeant Major Robert Hayes, a decorated soldier from the Iraq War, was the first to notice the small figure walking directly toward them. His initial reaction was concern. A child in the street during a parade could be dangerous, and his training kicked in as he prepared to signal for the formation to halt. But Then he saw what Emma was carrying, and his expression changed completely. Emma walked with purpose, her small feet carrying her directly to the center of the street where the parade was flowing. The carefully folded flag in her hands seemed almost too large for her to manage, but she held it with the kind of reverence that spoke of deep understanding. As she reached the middle of the street, she stopped and began to unfold the flag. The first few rows of spectators noticed immediately. Parents pointed and whispered to each other, unsure of what was happening. Some assumed it was part of the planned ceremony, perhaps a special presentation they hadn't been told about. But others sensed something different, something unscripted and powerfully real about the little girl standing alone in the middle of Main Street. Emma spread the flag wide. Her small arms stretched to their fullest extent. The red, white, and blue fabric caught the morning breeze and began to wave gently above her head. But this wasn't a display for the crowd of seated families and parade watchers. Emma turned away from the main viewing area and walked toward the side streets and back areas where the homeless individuals had been relocated. Sergeant Major Hayes raised his hand, and the entire parade formation came to a gradual halt. Veterans who had been marching in precise formation stopped where they were, their eyes following the little girl with the flag. The marching band's music faded to silence. Thousands of spectators grew quiet, sensing that something extraordinary was happening, even if they didn't yet understand what it was. Emma approached the first group of homeless individuals she could find. There was Maria, an elderly woman who had been living on the streets for 2 years after losing her apartment due to medical bills. Next to her stood James, a Vietnam veteran who had struggled with PTSD and addiction, eventually losing his home and family connections. Behind them were several others, each carrying their own story of hardship and resilience. With the flag held high above her head, Emma spoke in a clear voice that carried further than anyone expected from such a small person. This flag belongs to all of us. My grandpa fought for everyone, and that means you too. The words hit Maria like a physical force. Tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks as she realized what this child was doing. James stood straighter, his hand instinctively moving to his heart in a military salute he hadn't performed in years. The other individuals in the group looked around nervously and used to being the focus of positive attention, but deeply moved by this unexpected gesture of inclusion. Emma continued speaking, her voice growing stronger as she went on. My grandma told me that being American means everyone gets to belong. You belong here. You belong at this parade. This is your flag too. The silence that followed was profound. Even the children in the crowd had stopped talking, sensing the weight of the moment. Parents found themselves struggling to explain to their kids what was happening, mainly because they were having trouble processing it themselves. Then something beautiful began to occur. James stepped forward and joined Emma, placing his weathered hand gently on a corner of the flag. His voice, rough from years of hard living, spoke the words of the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Maria joined in, followed by the others in the group. Their voices, many and used to speaking loudly in public, grew stronger with each word. And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all. The effect on the watching crowd was immediate and overwhelming. Sergeant Major Hayes felt tears running down his face as he watched this group of forgotten Americans reclaim their place in the ceremony. Without hesitation, he stepped out of formation and walked over to Emma's group, adding his own voice to theirs as they repeated the pledge. One by one, other veterans from the parade began breaking ranks and joining the growing circle around Emma and her flag. Then, spectators started leaving their seats and walking into the street. Families who had been comfortably positioned in the prime viewing areas found themselves drawn to this impromptu ceremony that was happening in what had been the margins of the event. Emma looked around at the growing crowd gathering around her and felt something she had never experienced before, the power that comes from doing exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. She wasn't thinking about being brave or making a statement. She was simply sharing what belonged to everyone with people who had been told they didn't belong. Sarah Martinez had initially been frozen in shock when she realized what her daughter was doing. Her first instinct was to rush into the street and pull Emma back to safety, to apologize to the parade organizers and try to minimize any disruption. But as she watched the scene unfold, she found herself overwhelmed with pride. Her 7-year-old daughter was demonstrating a level of moral courage that put most adults to shame. The parade organizers faced a choice. They could try to restore order, get everyone back to their assigned positions, and continue with the planned program. Or they could recognize that something more important than their schedule was happening. To their credit, they chose to let the moment continue. Mayor Patricia Williams, who had been riding in a convertible near the front of the parade, got out of her car and walked back to where Emma stood with her flag. As the town's leader, she could have used her authority to end the disruption and get things back on track. Instead, she approached Emma and asked quietly, "Can I help you hold that flag, sweetie?" Emma smiled and nodded, making room for the mayor to take one corner of the flag. Soon, the banner was being held by Emma, Mayor Williams, Sergeant Major Hayes, Vietnam veteran James, Maria, and several other community members who represented every walk of life in Millfield. The local newspaper photographer, Janet Chun, had been positioned to capture traditional parade shots. But as she watched this scene develop, she realized she was witnessing something that would matter far more than any planned photo opportunity. She began taking pictures, but also found herself putting down her camera periodically just to experience the moment fully. The crowd that had gathered around Emma's flag now numbered in the hundreds. People who had never spoken to each other before were standing side by side, united by a child's simple act of inclusion. Conversations began happening naturally. Families asking homeless individuals about their stories, veterans connecting with other veterans regardless of their current housing situation, children asking their parents questions that led to important discussions about compassion and community. Emma noticed that some of the homeless individuals seemed overwhelmed by all the attention. She walked over to Maria, who was wiping tears from her eyes, and took her hand. "Are you okay?" she asked with genuine concern. Maria knelt down to Emma's level and spoke softly. "Honey, I haven't felt like I belonged anywhere for such a long time. What you did today, it reminded me that I'm still a person, still an American, still worthy of being included. Thank you for seeing me." Similar conversations were happening throughout the crowd. The artificial barriers that had existed between different groups in the community were dissolving as people realized they had more in common than they had differences. Veterans were sharing stories with veterans, parents were talking to other parents about their children, and everyone was grappling with questions about how they could make their community more inclusive and compassionate. The parade had officially been stopped for nearly 20 minutes, but no one seemed concerned about getting back on schedule. The marching bands had found places to sit in the street. The color guard remained at attention, but they were smiling as they watched the interactions happening around them. Emergency services personnel, who had initially been concerned about crowd control, found themselves becoming part of the gathering rather than managing it. Emma's simple gesture had transformed a traditional parade into something unprecedented, a genuine community moment where every person present felt valued and included. The flag that had started in the hands of one small girl was now being touched and supported by dozens of people, creating a living symbol of the unity and inclusion that America aspires to represent. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the extraordinary scene, it became clear that this Memorial Day would be remembered not for its perfect organization or traditional presentations, but for the moment when a 7-year-old girl reminded an entire community about the true meaning of the values they were gathering to honor. The transformation that began in the street that morning rippled outward through Millfield like waves from a stone dropped in still water. As Emma stood surrounded by her community, Holding the flag that had brought everyone together, she couldn't have imagined the lasting changes her simple act would create. Word of what had happened spread rapidly beyond the immediate crowd. Cell phone videos, taken by spectators who had witnessed the unprecedented moment, began appearing on social media within hours. But these weren't typical viral videos focused on entertainment or shock value. Instead, they captured something authentic and moving, a child's pure compassion inspiring an entire community to live up to its highest ideals. The immediate aftermath of Emma's gesture was equally remarkable. As the formal parade eventually resumed, it did so with a completely different energy. The homeless individuals who had been marginalized at the beginning of the morning now walked alongside the veterans and community leaders. Maria found herself marching next to a Gold Star mother who had lost her son in Afghanistan. James walked with fellow veterans, sharing stories and finding connections that had been missing from his life for years. Emma returned to her mother's side, but the flag that had started everything continued to be passed among different groups throughout the remainder of the parade route. Each person who held it seemed to understand that they were participating in something that honored both the memory of fallen service members and the living promise of American ideals. Local news stations picked up the story by evening, but it was the personal testimonies that made the deepest impact. James, the Vietnam veteran who had been living on the streets, was interviewed by a reporter who found him at the community dinner that had spontaneously organized after the parade ended. With tears in his eyes, he explained how Emma's gesture had given him something he thought he had lost forever, a sense of belonging. "I served my country for 3 tours," James said, his voice steady despite his emotion. "But when I came home and struggled with what I had seen and done, I felt like I had lost my right to be part of the community I had fought to protect. Today, a little girl reminded me that my service still matters, that I still matter regardless of my current circumstances." The story reached Maria Gonzalez-Shun, a social worker who had been trying to coordinate better services for Millfield's homeless population. She had attended the parade with her own family and had witnessed Emma's gesture firsthand. Inspired by what she had seen, she decided to use the momentum of the moment to push for changes she had been advocating for years. Within a week, Maria had organized a community meeting at the town hall. The same flag that Emma had carried became a centerpiece of the gathering, displayed prominently as community members discussed concrete ways to address homelessness and social isolation in their town. The meeting drew more attendees than any town hall in recent memory, with people from every economic and social level participating in the conversation. Emma's mother, Sarah, found herself becoming an unexpected advocate as well. The pride she felt in her daughter's actions motivated her to learn more about the issues that had prompted Emma's gesture. She began volunteering at the local food bank and discovered that many of the people they served were employed individuals who simply couldn't afford housing in an increasingly expensive market. The impact extended beyond Millfield's borders as well. The video of Emma's gesture, shared thousands of times across social platforms, began inspiring similar acts of inclusion in other communities. A group of high school students in a neighboring town organized a dignity drive to collect supplies for homeless individuals. A veterans organization in the state capital created a new program specifically designed to support homeless veterans by connecting them with stable housing and mental health resources. But perhaps the most significant change was in Emma herself. While she had acted from pure instinct that day, the conversations and experiences that followed helped her understand the broader implications of what she had done. Her grandmother Rosa, when she heard about Emma's actions, sat her down for a long conversation about the difference between charity and justice, between helping individuals and changing systems. "What you did was beautiful, Mija," Rosa told her granddaughter. "But now you have to decide if you want to keep making a difference. Because once you see something that's not right, you can't unsee it." Emma did decide to keep making a difference. With her mother's support, she began participating in community service projects and attending town meetings. Her questions, delivered with the clarity that only comes from a child's perspective, often cut through complex adult discussions and focused attention on practical solutions. The annual Memorial Day parade the following year was structured completely differently. The planning committee, now including representatives from the homeless community and social service organizations, designed the event as an inclusive celebration from the beginning. The theme was honoring all who serve, with recognition that service to community takes many forms and that every community member deserves dignity and respect. Emma, now 8 years old, was asked to be the honorary Grand Marshal of the parade. She agreed on the condition that the same flag she had carried the previous year would be featured prominently, and that anyone who wanted to help carry it would be welcome to do so. The transformation extended to concrete policy changes as well. The town council, influenced by the ongoing community discussions that Emma's gesture had sparked, allocated funding for additional social services and affordable housing initiatives. A new community center was established, designed specifically to serve as a gathering place for people from all walks of life, with programs ranging from job training to mental health support. Local businesses began participating in hiring programs that specifically reached out to individuals experiencing homelessness. The owner of Martinez Hardware Store, inspired by Sarah's advocacy and Emma's example, created job opportunities that included temporary housing assistance for employees who needed it. The religious community in Millfield also responded to the challenge Emma's gesture had posed. Rather than simply offering charity, congregations began examining their own practices and beliefs about inclusion and social justice. Interfaith cooperation increased, with different religious groups working together on community service projects and advocacy efforts. Educational changes followed as well. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, worked with the school district to develop curriculum that addressed issues of empathy, social justice, and civic engagement. Emma's story became part of the local history that students learned, not as a feel-good tale, but as an example of how individual actions can catalyze community change. The ripple effects continued to expand over the months and years that followed. Emma's gesture had demonstrated that authentic change often begins with the simplest acts of human recognition and inclusion. It showed that children, unencumbered by adult assumptions about how things work, often possess the moral clarity to see what needs to be done and the courage to do it. 3 years later, Emma was invited to speak at a national conference on homelessness and community development. Standing at the podium, now 10 years old and more articulate but still possessing the same essential compassion that had motivated her original gesture, she shared what she had learned. "I didn't stop that parade to make people cry or to become famous," she said to the audience of social workers, policymakers, and advocates. "I stopped it because everyone deserves to be included in the things that are supposed to matter to all of us. If we're celebrating America, then we need to celebrate all Americans. If we're honoring people who served our country, then we need to honor all of them, no matter what their life looks like now." The standing ovation that followed lasted several minutes, but Emma wasn't thinking about the applause. She was thinking about Maria, who now had stable housing and had become a community advocate herself. She was thinking about James, who had reconnected with his estranged daughter and was working as a peer counselor for other veterans. She was thinking about her own community, which had learned that inclusivity isn't just a nice idea. It's a practice that requires intention, effort, and the willingness to change. Most importantly, she was thinking about the lesson her grandmother had taught her about seeing people who others overlook and how that simple act of recognition had grown into something larger than any of them had imagined possible. Emma's secret gesture had stopped a parade cold, but what it had started was a movement of compassion that continued to grow, touching lives and changing communities one person, one family, one town at a time. It proved that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with grand proclamations or organized protests, but with a child's pure heart recognizing what adults have forgotten, that everyone deserves to belong, everyone matters, and everyone has value that should be honored and celebrated. The flag that Emma had carried that day was eventually donated to the Millfield Historical Society, where it remains on display with a plaque that reads, "In memory of those who served, and in honor of those who continue to serve by building inclusive communities." Donated by Emma Martinez, age 7, who reminded us that true patriotism means making sure everyone feels at home in America. But the real legacy of that Memorial Day wasn't preserved in a museum case. It lived on in the daily choices of a community that had learned to see each person as worthy of dignity and respect, and in the understanding that the smallest gestures, when motivated by genuine love and justice, have the power to change the world.